I used to think my life was simple, predictable, and safe. I'm 34 now, but looking back, the world I built for myself felt like a carefully constructed puzzle. I had my routines, my apartment, my work, and my small but close circle of friends. Nothing flashy, nothing particularly extraordinary, just a life that made sense. And then there was my family, my parents, who always hovered somewhere between doting and overbearing, and my younger brother, Mark. Mark was 28, 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, we were inseparable. We shared jokes, secrets, occasional fights, and those moments of silence that somehow never felt awkward. He was my person, my tether to normalcy, someone I could rely on without question. Life had a rhythm. I'd wake up early, make coffee, check emails, go to work. Evenings were simple, cooking something small for dinner, catching up on a show, maybe a call with a friend. Weekends were either dedicated to errands or, more often, time with Mark or my parents. There was comfort in this predictability, and I took it for granted. I thought stability was the same as happiness. Then Elle came into the picture. She wasn't just someone I dated, she felt like a spark in a room that had always been dim. I met her at a mutual friend's party when I was 28. She laughed in a way that made people around her smile too, the kind of laughter that felt real and unpretentious. She was smart, funny, unapologetically herself. We clicked immediately, like we had always been meant to understand each other. Conversations that lasted hours felt effortless, debates felt exciting instead of tense, and the rare moments of silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the person who changes everything. Mark met her a few times early on. At first, it was nothing extraordinary. Small talk over dinner, casual jokes, polite smiles. I didn't notice anything unusual, though now I realize that was the first moment I could have been paying closer attention. I assumed, naively, that someone who made me happy would naturally be someone my brother liked too. That was my first mistake, trust without question, blind optimism. My life, as I saw it, was functioning perfectly. I loved my job, which wasn't glamorous but provided stability. My apartment was modest, but I liked the way it smelled of coffee in the morning and books on the shelves. I was healthy, reasonably social, and, as far as I knew, surrounded by people I could count on. In hindsight, I see the fragility that I was blind to, the tiny cracks in the walls I had built around myself. But at the time, I was happy, or at least I thought I was. Looking back, that first year with Elle and the quiet life I shared with Mark felt almost sacred. Even the little irritations, the arguments over trivial things, the slight annoyances, felt natural and manageable. There was trust, laughter, warmth. I never imagined that within a few years, everything I leaned on, my girlfriend, my brother, my sense of safety, would feel like it was being pulled out from under me. And yet, the early days were innocent, beautiful even, filled with small, perfect moments that now sting when I remember them. I thought I knew how life worked. I thought I knew the people I loved. I thought stability was permanent. I was wrong. Meeting Elle felt like stepping into a room I didn't know I had been missing. It wasn't just her appearance, though she was undeniably captivating. It was the way she carried herself, the way her mind moved, the way she spoke as if every word mattered. I met her at a mutual friend's small gathering. The kind of party where nobody really mingled and everyone stuck to their corners, nursing drinks and awkwardly scanning the room. She, somehow, was the center of it all without trying. I remember noticing her laugh first, a sound that made everything else fade into the background. It wasn't loud or fake, it was warm, infectious, and a little reckless, like it could break the tension in the room with a single note. We started talking over drinks. At first, it was casual, almost forgettable. But within minutes, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. Our conversation skipped effortlessly from absurd hypotheticals to personal philosophies. It was raw, candid, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was performing to keep someone interested. She asked questions that made me think, and when I answered, she listened, not just politely, but like she really wanted to understand. That night, I left her apartment feeling lightheaded, almost dizzy, with a mixture of excitement and fear. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, the kind of intoxicating hope that makes you think, this could be the person who changes everything. Our relationship moved fast. We texted constantly, hung out nearly every day, and soon I was inviting her to small family dinners. Mark met her casually, nothing formal, just a chance encounter over lunch. At the time, I didn't notice anything unusual between them. They smiled, joked politely, exchanged the typical brother-girlfriend pleasantries. I didn't think twice. I assumed, in my usual blind optimism, that anyone who made me happy would naturally be someone my brother liked too. I was naive. I never considered that chemistry could exist in ways I wouldn't control, or that trust, what I thought was unshakable, could be fragile. Those early months were magical. We explored the city together, tried new restaurants, argued playfully about the silliest things, and laughed until our sides hurt. There was a sense of safety in her presence, a rare combination of comfort and excitement. She had a way of making mundane moments feel significant: coffee in the morning, long walks in the park, the quiet of a shared apartment on lazy Sundays. It felt effortless. Life felt easy. Looking back, though, I realized I was already placing all my sense of happiness on her shoulders. I ignored subtle hints, the way she sometimes grew distant for hours or days without explanation. I chalked it up to stress, to mood swings, to nothing important. I didn't see the small fissures forming in what I thought was an unbreakable bond. And of course, I never suspected Mark. He was my brother. The idea that someone I trusted implicitly could be involved in this storm was unthinkable. At the time, everything felt perfect. I thought I had found love, stability, and family all wrapped into one person. I thought I knew my brother. I thought life was steady. I thought nothing could shake the quiet happiness I had built. I was wrong. Life with Elle felt like walking on air for the first few years. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, little things began to unsettle me. At first, I ignored them. I told myself it was nothing, just quirks, stress, busy schedules. Maybe I was overthinking. But the truth is, those small signs were the first cracks in what I believed was unshakable trust. It started with the texts. Elle had her phone glued to her hand more than usual. Sometimes I'd glance over while she was typing, and she'd quickly hide it, saying, "Oh, just work stuff." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe in the person I loved. I didn't want to see shadows where there were none. Then there were the cancelled plans. Small things at first, skipping dinner because she was tired, or had to finish something for work. I brushed it off. I thought, okay, everyone needs space sometimes. But gradually, the excuses piled up, and I started noticing a pattern. Weekends I expected to be ours were suddenly free for her. Catching up with friends, or running errands, and I never got invited along. The part that stung the most, in hindsight, was her attitude toward Mark. She suddenly began spending more time with him, just the two of them, under the guise of helping him with work, or giving advice. I didn't protest at first. I told myself I was being paranoid. Mark was my brother. Of course, they'd have things in common. And I trusted them both. I thought I could handle a few coffees or casual meetups. But something about the way they laughed together, the way her attention lingered longer than it ever had on me, started gnawing at the edges of my mind. There were fleeting moments too, subtle but unmistakable if you're paying attention. A message that popped up and was quickly deleted, a nervous glance, a hesitation when I asked who she was texting. I remember one evening, she was giggling at her phone while sitting across from me at dinner. I asked, half-jokingly, "What's so funny?" She shrugged, laughed nervously, and said, "Nothing. Don't worry about it." But the unease didn't leave me. It stayed in the pit of my stomach, whispering doubts I tried to silence. I questioned myself constantly. Was I imagining it? Was I being controlling? Was I overreacting? I loved her, and I didn't want to ruin what we had by being suspicious. So I pushed the feelings aside. I smiled, I joked, I kept loving her with the same intensity as before, pretending my instincts didn't exist. Looking back now, I can see the patterns, the tiny alarms I ignored. The cancelled plans, the secretive messages, the coffees with Mark that seemed unnecessary. But at the time, I was blind with trust and love. I thought my devotion could shield me from betrayal. I couldn't have been more wrong. And yet, even with these first warnings, life seemed normal. I went to work, came home, laughed with her, and tried to push aside the subtle discomfort that had begun to creep in. I clung to what I wanted to believe, that everything was fine. That trust, once given, was unshakable. That the people I loved would never intentionally hurt me. I would learn soon enough how fragile that trust really was. The little warnings I had ignored began to feel heavier. Elle's attention seemed divided. She laughed at Mark's jokes in a way she never laughed at mine. She spent long afternoons helping him with work, sometimes canceling plans with me at the last minute. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. But the pit in my stomach kept growing. I started noticing the subtle changes in her behavior. She became secretive with her phone, often leaving it face down or walking away when a notification popped up. When I asked about it, she smiled, shrugged, and said, "Nothing important." But her eyes looked guilty, or maybe just nervous, and that image burned itself into my mind. Mark, too, began acting differently. He laughed more easily, lingered a little longer in conversation, and sometimes avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself I was reading too much into normal brotherly behavior. I clung to trust because it was all I had left. I wanted to believe in Elle, in Mark, in the life I thought we had. I pushed the uneasy feelings down, laughed along with them, pretended everything was fine. But deep down, a quiet storm was brewing, and I couldn't stop it. Something was changing, and I had no idea how much my world was about to unravel. By the end of that week, I realized I couldn't ignore it any longer. My heart told me something terrible was coming, but my mind refused to prepare. I'll never forget the moment I saw it. I don't even know why I looked at her laptop that night, maybe instinct, maybe a nagging fear I had been denying, but the message hit me like a punch to the chest. "I can't stop thinking about you. I love you, even though I don't want to hurt him." It was from Elle to Mark. My girlfriend. My brother. My mind went blank. I read it over and over, hoping my eyes were deceiving me, that it was a misunderstanding, some strange joke. But the words were clear. Love. My brother. My life, the life I had carefully built, collapsed in that instant. I confronted Elle immediately. My hands were shaking, my voice barely audible. "Is this true? Is this about Mark?" She didn't deny it. She cried, stammered, tried to explain, saying it just happened, and that she didn't want to lose me. I couldn't process anything. My chest hurt. I felt dizzy, betrayed, humiliated. Then I called Mark. I needed to hear it from him. His quiet response, "I didn't mean for this to happen," felt like another blow. No apology, no explanation, just the stark truth that the people I trusted most had crossed a line I never imagined. That night, the apartment felt alien. The walls closed in. My world had changed forever. The people I loved most, my girlfriend and my brother, had chosen something that excluded me entirely. And in that moment I realized I was losing everything that mattered. The hours after that discovery were unbearable. I couldn't think straight. My chest felt heavy, my stomach twisted, and every breath seemed shallow. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to make the world feel real again, but I was frozen. Elle tried to explain, to justify, to plead. Tears streamed down her face as she told me she didn't mean for this to happen, and that she still cared about me. But the words felt hollow. I couldn't hear them through the chaos in my head. The trust one had given her, the love I had poured into her, felt like it had been erased in a single, merciless moment. I called Mark again. I needed accountability, something, anything. But he was quiet, evasive, almost numb. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said again, almost as if repeating the line could undo the damage. I hung up, trembling. How could the people I loved most in the world do this to me? That night, I paced the apartment, replaying every interaction, every joke, every glance. I questioned myself relentlessly. Had I missed signs? Was it my fault? Could I have done something to prevent this? But none of the answers mattered. The betrayal was real, and it cut deeper than I had ever imagined. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every small sound, every notification, made my heart jump. My apartment, once my sanctuary, felt alien, hostile. I realized, with a cold, sinking clarity, that nothing in my life would ever feel the same again. The people I trusted, the life I loved, had been shattered in an instant, and there was no putting it back together. The confrontation felt endless. I don't even remember how long we talked, or yelled. Elle sat on the couch, tears streaming, while I paced like a caged animal. I demanded answers I didn't even want to hear, words I almost feared would make it real. How long? Why? Did you love him before me? Her answers were messy, fumbling, full of contradictions. She claimed it just happened. That she didn't want to hurt me, that she still cared for me. Every word felt like another shard in my chest. I couldn't understand how someone I loved so deeply could betray me so completely. I called Mark into the room. He was quiet, avoiding my eyes. When I asked him directly, he barely whispered, "I didn't mean for this to happen." I felt rage bubbling so high I thought it might drown me. I wanted to scream at them both, to make them feel even a fraction of the betrayal I was drowning in. Elle tried to explain, to justify herself, to cry, to manipulate even. I didn't know what I was more angry at, the betrayal itself, the casualness of their emotions, or my own blind trust that had allowed this to happen. I felt small, humiliated, and utterly powerless. By the end of that night, nothing had been resolved. Tears, accusations, pleas, they all mixed into a blur of despair. I realized then that some things could not be fixed. Some trust, once broken, could never be fully restored. And yet, despite the pain, a part of me still wanted answers, still clung to hope that this nightmare might somehow undo itself. The days after the confrontation were unbearable. I barely slept. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with memories of laughter that now felt like mockery. Every sound in my apartment, the hum of the fridge, the wind outside, reminded me of her absence, of the betrayal I couldn't erase. I stopped eating properly. Coffee became a crutch, and even then I felt hollow. The walls of my apartment, once comforting, now pressed in on me. I walked through rooms I had once loved, staring at the same furniture, the same pictures, and everything felt tainted. Their faces appeared in my mind unbidden, her smile, his laugh, and I flinched as if I'd been struck. Friends tried to reach out, but I couldn't talk. I didn't want to explain. How do you explain that the people you trusted most, your girlfriend, your brother, turned against you simultaneously? I became quiet, withdrawn. Calls went unanswered. Invitations declined. My social world contracted until it barely existed. I blamed myself constantly. What had I missed? Where had I failed? My mind looped over every small sign I had ignored, the cancelled plans, the secretive texts, the way she lingered with him. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner, for being too trusting, for loving too deeply. Even breathing felt like an effort. The betrayal had stripped me of certainty, leaving only raw, gnawing pain. I realized then that the collapse wasn't just emotional, it was physical, mental, a complete upheaval of everything I thought I knew about love, family, and safety. After the collapse, I withdrew completely. Family gatherings became unbearable. Even seeing Mark, my own brother, filled me with a mixture of rage and despair. I stopped attending dinners, skipped weekends, and retreated into my apartment. The walls became both prison and refuge. I didn't want to face anyone, didn't want to explain, didn't want to hear empty condolences or awkward questions. I lied to my parents, told them I was stressed with work, that I just needed time. They didn't press, and I was grateful for the ignorance. Even friends stopped reaching out after repeated refusals. I realized I didn't want company. I wanted to disappear. Every reminder of them stabbed at me. A photo of the three of us, a shared joke, a place we had been together. I felt haunted by moments that were once comforting. My own home felt alien. The kitchen where we had eaten together, the couch where we had argued or laughed, every corner reminded me of betrayal. The loneliness became a strange companion. I stopped talking, stopped texting, stopped responding to life. It was easier than facing the truth daily. I replayed conversations, replayed smiles, tried to find the moment when things went wrong. But there was no single instant, just a slow unraveling that I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I started questioning everything, my judgment, my trust, my ability to know people at all. The world outside continued, oblivious, while I was trapped in a loop of memory and pain, trying desperately to figure out how to exist without them. At some point, I realized I couldn't stay frozen forever. Not because I felt ready to move on, but because the alternative was slowly disappearing. I started with small, almost insignificant things. Getting out of bed at a reasonable hour. Showering. Opening the windows to let in air that didn't smell like old memories. I forced myself to go for walks. At first, it felt pointless. I walked with my head down, avoiding eye contact, feeling like a ghost moving through a city full of living people. But the movement helped, even if only slightly. My body remembered how to exist before my mind did. I went back to work more consistently. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I smiled when required, answered emails, attended meetings. It felt fake, but structure helped. Routine gave me something to hold onto when my thoughts threatened to spiral. One evening, I caught myself laughing at something on TV. The sound startled me. It felt wrong, almost like a betrayal of my own pain. But it was real. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't immediately hate myself for it. The pain was still there, heavy and persistent, but it no longer crushed me entirely. I wasn't healed. I wasn't even close. But I was moving inch by inch, towards something that resembled survival. I understood then that recovery wouldn't be dramatic or inspiring. It would be quiet, slow, and deeply uncomfortable. And maybe that was okay. Maybe taking tentative steps forward was enough for now. As I started to rebuild even a fraction of myself, I realized that some relationships couldn't exist in their previous form. Elle tried reaching out, texts, emails, even a call I didn't answer. Mark, too, occasionally sent a message, an apology or a tentative check-in. Each attempt sent a wave of anger and grief through me. I had to set boundaries, harsh as they felt. No contact. No explanations. No reopening wounds that had barely begun to close. I blocked numbers, ignored messages, and made it clear to myself that I wasn't obligated to forgive anyone for their choices. This wasn't about punishment. It was survival. I couldn't move forward if I kept letting them back into my life. I started protecting my space, physically and emotionally. I reclaimed parts of my apartment, threw away things that reminded me of them, rearranged furniture. Each small act was a quiet defiance, a statement that I could still control my own world. Friends noticed a change. I started spending more time with a few trusted people, letting them back in slowly. I laughed sometimes, spoke freely, but always with caution. It was a delicate balance, being open without letting anyone close enough to cause the kind of damage I'd already endured. Setting these boundaries was painful. It meant accepting that some relationships were gone forever, that trust couldn't be rebuilt with certain people. But in doing so, I realized I was reclaiming myself, brick by brick, from the wreckage they had left behind. With boundaries in place, I slowly turned my attention inward. For the first time in months, I started asking myself who I was outside of the chaos they had created. I remembered hobbies I had abandoned: running, reading, writing little notes I never shared. I began reclaiming them, not to distract myself from the pain, but to reconnect with the parts of me that were still intact. Running became my therapy. The rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, the steady in and out of breath, grounded me in a way nothing else could. Thoughts of Elle and Mark didn't disappear, but I learned to let them pass without letting them dictate my day. I wrote in journals, sometimes only for a few sentences, but even those small acts helped me process emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel. I also started spending more time with friends, cautiously at first. I laughed again, awkwardly, haltingly, but it was real. I discovered that being with people who cared didn't always feel like a risk. I was beginning to rebuild trust slowly, piece by piece, starting with myself and extending outward. There were still setbacks. Some nights I would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, haunted by images and conversations I couldn't forget. But now, those nights didn't define me. I was learning that healing wasn't linear. It was messy, uneven, and sometimes painful. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a spark of control returning. I realized that I could exist in a world without them, and that my life, my identity, didn't have to be defined by the people who had hurt me most. Months passed, and slowly I began to accept the truth I had fought for so long. Elle and Mark had made their choices. I couldn't undo what happened, and I couldn't force them to feel remorse or change. Acceptance wasn't about excusing them, it was about reclaiming my own life. I stopped replaying the betrayal constantly. I no longer counted every text, every laugh, every moment as evidence of their intentions. The memories still stung, but they no longer held the same power over me. I realized that carrying the pain didn't protect me, it trapped me. I also began to accept that some relationships could not be restored. I would not have the brother I once knew, nor the girlfriend I once loved. And while that hurt deeply, I understood that clinging to what could never return would only prolong my suffering. Acceptance, in its own quiet way, felt like freedom. I returned to routines that had been abandoned. Work became manageable again, meals became nourishing instead of mere survival, and small joys, a book, a walk, the smell of coffee, took on new meaning. I still had moments of sadness, flashbacks, pangs of anger, but they were now fragments, not a constant storm. Acceptance didn't erase the past, but it allowed me to live in the present without being consumed by it. I could look at my life and recognize that I was still standing, still breathing, still capable of moving forward. It was the first time in a long time I felt a sense of quiet, tentative peace. With acceptance came the first real glimpses of life beyond the betrayal. I started making plans for myself that didn't revolve around Elle or Mark, things that reminded me I could exist independently of the pain they caused. I explored new hobbies, joined a small running group, and even took a weekend trip alone, just to feel the world moving around me without the shadow of what had happened. I began to open myself to people again, cautiously. Friends who had drifted away gradually came back into my life, and I allowed myself to trust them a little at a time. Laughter, conversation, and companionship returned, not fully healed, not without hesitation, but real and tangible. Work became a refuge. It was predictable, structured, and offered me a space where I could succeed without the weight of betrayal. I started setting new goals, small ones at first, then bigger ones, projects, personal challenges, long-term plans. Each success reminded me that I was still capable, that I hadn't been broken beyond repair. I also began to think about the future, something I had avoided for months. I allowed myself to imagine a life where I could be happy again, even if it looked different from what I had envisioned. I knew scars would remain, they would always be part of my story, but I started seeing them as markers of resilience rather than reminders of failure. Moving forward didn't erase the past. It didn't bring back the trust one lost. But it gave me control over my life again, the power to choose who I allowed in, and the knowledge that even after losing what I thought was everything, I could still build something meaningful. A year has passed since the betrayal that nearly destroyed me. The pain hasn't disappeared, it never will entirely, but it no longer defines my days. I've built a new foundation, piece by piece, out of resilience, self-awareness, and the hard-earned knowledge that life continues even after heartbreak. I live in a space that feels entirely my own now. I've rearranged my apartment, decorated it for me, filled it with things that make me happy. I've filled my calendar with routines, work, and small joys, coffee in the morning, books I can lose myself in, evening runs that remind me of my own strength. These small acts feel like reclaiming ownership of my life. I've allowed myself to trust cautiously again, first with friends, then with acquaintances, and perhaps one day, with someone new. But I no longer confuse closeness with dependency or allow anyone to hold power over my sense of self. I am careful, not out of fear, but out of hard-won wisdom. The memories of Elle and Mark still surface sometimes, flashes of laughter, glimpses of happiness that now feel like ghosts. I don't hate them anymore. I've learned that holding on to rage only prolongs suffering. I accept that they made their choices, and I made mine, to survive, to live, to rebuild. I am not the same person I was before, but I am stronger. I am cautious, aware, but alive. I've learned that life does not end with betrayal. It bends, it challenges, it forces you to rediscover yourself. And slowly I have. Now I can breathe. Now I can live. Now I am mine again.